I've been speaking to different group leaders, CEOs, and I've been asking them, how do you see the future of opportunity? Right? And if you were to basically share a message to a 20-year-old, right, to a 30-year-old today, and largely itself, right, what we may not really understand yet, right, is that this particular generation, this particular room, means you're on average over here anywhere between 25 to maybe 35 years old or so, right? And if you are in that particular age group, you are actually very, very similar to it, to the early pioneer generation in 1965, right? That's the rough age group they're dealing with. And if we were to somehow, right, in this turning juncture, right, of Singapore's development, give a word of advice, right, what would we give? And it's funny over here because none of them could give advice, but all of them could say what you shouldn't listen to. One of the biggest feedback they've been giving over here is that follow your passion is a narrative that's very strongly embedded within the millennial generation, right? And the idea itself is basically that if you come in and you follow your passion, if you really find out what you want to do well, you will master it, you will do well, and then you will succeed, right? And what they have said over here is that as far as the Singapore context is concerned, it has to be interpreted very, very differently. Fundamentally, Singapore survival is about finding opportunity. If you took a look from 1965 up to now, essentially that's what we did. We searched and we found opportunity. And we found opportunity in a sense over here, not in relation to what we liked or disliked, what exactly was our passion or not passion, what was our talent or talent. None of those considerations were there. At a point in time, it was just simply what was relevant and what is needed right on the outside. And you'll find over here that if you begin to go down all of this like Bilahari's sort of narrative, a lot of the narrative over here is that all your passions, they are, right, and they're pointless as far as basically the world is concerned, right? And sometimes these two narratives tend to clash, right? And the clashing over here is finding opportunity versus do I follow my passion? Now, some of you in the room, right, might be thinking, but is that really a, fair dichotomy, right? Isn't it not possible itself, right, to find your passion or to follow your passion, but at the same time itself, right, begin to actually seek for opportunity there, right? And in doing so over here, let's give some insight to it. I'm going to go into an emotional frame, and the emotional frame, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to frame out largely itself in the field of emotion and in coaching, right? What essentially itself, right, is happening for a person as they are moving ahead in life, okay? So what you'll find over here is that essentially there are actually only two narratives as far as the world is concerned. The two key stories. The first story itself is a story around how things should be or can be, okay? And the second story over here is basically the way that things are, okay? How things should be or can be, and the other story is how things are. All emotions actually linger in between these two narratives. Think about this. What is anger? Should be. I don't like it. It really should be like this. What is fear? Can be. Right? What is envy? What is jealousy? What is gratitude? What is interesting about this, right, is that in this particular tension you're looking at, and unfortunately in every single human being, right, both narratives exist at the same time. Okay, both of us, it exists at the same time, which means that when you're thinking over here, you will hold both these narratives. And if you do hold both these narratives, right, you'll start experiencing this. So let's take a look, right, at what we mean by suffering. Okay, very oftentimes within religious circles as well as coaching circles, they will give you this famous phrase that say, pain is a given, right? But suffering is completely optional. Pain is a given, but suffering is essentially optional. And if you're looking at suffering, right, you will find that when we have both stories at the same time, right, we tend to experience a lot of suffering, right? So what does this look like or feel like? If you run whatever stories you have, you find, right, that a lot of these stories linger between this, and the wider the gap between are and should be, right, the more painful the suffering will be, right? And it's the kind of suffering itself that actually keeps you alive, awake, right? Not alive, sorry. Keeps you awake for some time, right? Tossing and turning. So if you look at this, right, you will find that people, therefore, in a lot of their work, right, and I'll suggest to you, as a broad idea, that everybody in this particular room, no matter what work you do, your essential work, right, is centered around reducing suffering. that if suffering is defined as the gap between this and this, then your work is essentially about reducing the suffering, right? And it's two ways. You will either bring the ideals down, right, and give people a piece of their mind and show them this is what the reality is. Don't live in the clouds. Come down here, right? Or to move it up and make this particular current state, right, the ideal of where we should be. And I'll suggest to yourself, right, that the whole notion of work, right, is around navigating this particular territory. Right? If you take a look yourself, right, at this idea, and in some ways, right, we begin to do this. One way is to take the way that things should be and can be and simply bring them down this way, right? And everybody aims to reduce suffering this way. But in this case, right, you will have actually sudden emotions that are coming up. Right? So when you take what should be and you bring it down to the way that things are, what shows up over here typically is maybe resignation or even acceptance. So what you're seeing over here is basically one range of emotions that can begin to happen when we take that down. But what happens when we bring it up? So there are other ways, right, that we also begin to manage that, right? Sometimes over here, taking basically the way that things are and moving up, right, to the way that things should be, right, in that particular sense. You have words, of course, enthusiasm, ambition, determination, resilience, and including being really delusional, right? So stalkers tend to be like that, right? Is she your girlfriend? Yeah, of course she is. Yeah. I used to chase her all the time, right, kind of things over there, but now I don't want to chase her anymore, right? She's mine. Right? So she'll live in that delusional space over there, but essentially the suffering is ended because you're together with me right now. Right? And in doing so over here, you'll find, right, that in the navigating of these two things, right, the range of emotions are here. But what this therefore plays out to, right, is something like this. So our work, or our commitment, right, towards work is essentially itself the resolution of these particular narratives. The funny thing that if you really start looking, right, at people who achieve immense excellence in their life, okay, they are also, because they're human, living in exactly the same space. A lot of the times, however, they don't linger, right, in their story around what things are, but they always linger in their mind into what things should be or can be, right? And their mind tends to linger in that space. Take a look at Olympic athletes. Olympic athletes are essentially in the space of what can be, right? And their passion over here, right, is entirely committed itself to actually hitting that particular space, right? And you will therefore find those kind of emotions around ambition, enthusiasm, right, things like that, okay? And they begin to push forward a lot, right, within that particular area. But in doing this over here, right, what is interesting, right, is that if you see this, and I'll show you this, I don't know whether you can see this from the back, but what it says over here is that the origin for passion, Latin, is pati, and pati means to suffer. Passion is really not about go and have a good time and enjoy yourself. If you are in passion, you are in suffering. If you truly take a look, right, a lot of the people in terms of the work, where you have looking at them and you're saying, wow, look at this person. This person is really passionate, right? Is this person enjoying themselves? Typically, they're working their ass off. Typically, they are truly driving to a place over here, right, where you are not seeing a good life, no. You're seeing basically them fail and pick up, right? They are committed itself to the art, and yes, right, they are suffering. The funny thing over here is that if you look at basically the word passion, and you understand that passion is essentially the same as suffering, then this word is even more mind-blowing. That compassion is essentially to suffer together. So if I start an emotional frame around this, I told you at the start, right, I promised you that I'll be starting with the emotional frame. And I promised you that I am talking about the economy, even though we may not think I'm talking about the economy. Right? But we are. And as we do this over here, I will suggest to you that a lot of the reason why Singapore succeeded, right, is because of two keywords: passion as attached to suffering, and compassion to mutually suffer together. I'll suggest you. Right? And if you put these things together, what essentially you're seeing is this. When I left the service and I set it up as a school of thought, I was running 21 classes a week. Right? So 21 classes a week, right? Actually, what it looks like is this. It's 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, right? Monday to Sunday. Right? And we're just running 21 classes a week, again and again, and again and again, and again and again. And in that particular passion over there, right, I think my mom kept asking me, "Ni boleh ah?" You know, and those of you who are not Chinese just means over there that, aren't you somehow tired, right? And the thing is, I was, but I was in passion, right? And I was achieving itself a certain sense of mastery as I was beginning to do that particular work, right? Because my narrative was not it was not in what things are, but it really was in, right, what things can be or should be. And there was almost a hunger to find out over here that how do we go about, right, improving classes, and how do we come to a place where we really can engage them to a level that it will be meaningful for them, right? And in doing so over here, what's interesting is that, and I still am thankful till today, that the subject that I taught, right, was this subject called general paper, right? And the thing about general paper is that it actually didn't have any subject area, right? It was a broad subject area, so we could necessarily learn everything. And what I began to see itself is not only, right, my own commitment to my own passion, right, but I began to stumble upon other people's passion at the same time, right? So if you understand this, when I say I stumble upon other people's passion, I'm also stumbling upon their suffering, right? I'm stumbling upon their suffering. And when I go in and I start reading about Botswana, right, and I think that was the first country I began to read because we were just understanding about the blood diamond crisis that was there, right? And I know it's a very old issue right now, but the first time I was doing this, there was such compassion, right, for what is it that I read. And in doing so over here, I think, right, the early years of mastery around the commitment to that subject really began to, it really began to widen, right? The range of things that we cared for, right, really began to widen this, right? And each time itself, right, we took commitment to truly love, care for issues outside of ourselves. And right now, if you ask me, and I say this genuinely and seriously, whether I'm responsible for Sudan, I would say yes. Am I responsible for Singapore? Yes. Am I responsible as well for the teaching and the quality of education in Singapore? Yes, I am. And I'm passionate about it. And you'll find, right, that in a really interesting way, when we start to care for other people's suffering, right, you also start to innovate. When you start to truly care for other people's suffering, you will also start to innovate. Some of you in this particular room over here are civil servants, right? And civil service will keep running this particular topic. They'll say over here, oh, whole of government. Right? Come together, right? Let's do the whole of government, right? All different, civil ministries and agencies over here, that's whole of government. What essentially is whole of government? It's, I'm LTA, right? Your Ministry of Manpower, please understand my suffering. No, it is. Because if you understand my suffering, and you understand basically what I'm going through over here, and you hold this for yourself, and you are in compassion, right, for what it is I'm doing over here, maybe you will see basically some sort of solution. Essentially. But you'll find over here that compassion is not a natural state of things. People do not naturally go out, right, and hear me clearly, they may have pity or sympathy for people, but compassion is a whole different thing altogether. Compassion itself is basically the connection to a person and the responsibility, right, to take basically care for their life or care for their suffering, right? So in doing so over here, what we're seeing, right, is that essentially around the pattern of this is that people can master their own passions, right? But if they widen it and it begins to develop compassion, right, they will start to find opportunity. And what happens over here is that I genuinely believe that 50% of jobs, right, that you guys will experience in the next 20 years, they do not even exist today. They don't. Multiple jobs will disappear and new jobs self will form, right? And I can only suggest to you that the jobs that will form, right, where do we find them? We find them in other people's suffering. The jobs of the future is not that it's invisible to you. If you truly look at other people's suffering, where they have irritation over, and Singapore is a minefield of suffering, you will hear complaints everywhere, right? And one thing itself we've always said is that every single complaint is actually a niche market. Every complaint is niche market. Sooner or later, when that particular complaint gets to a pain point, when it actually becomes difficult, right, someone's going to start paying for it. Right? And the thing about this over here is that we have to start looking out for these particular things. Right? One of the key questions I began to ask is, okay, if we are going out and we're looking at basically the next 50 years of the economy, right, and we're looking at essentially this whole idea of the future of opportunity, right? So the question I keep asked was this: what essentially is making us money right now? Okay, what are the threats that are going to kill us? Okay, and how do youth begin to capitalize on that? Where we are essentially, right, is around these areas where this is essentially what is driving a lot of the Singapore economy. One of the things that we put out, right, among a lot of people that we met was that we asked them, so what do you think about all the lawyers that want to leave their jobs and make cupcakes, right, and set up basically a cafe for themselves, right, or follow this particular dream, right? And I remember itself, right, what they were doing is that they were looking at these particular things, and if anybody want to make cupcakes, then I apologize if this is part of your dream. And I'm going to do a gross oversimplification of what they tried to explain to me, but I don't really understand. Okay, but it really is a gross simplification, but it starts showing you what this particular cupcake shop essentially is about. Okay, so I'm going to move and going to show you what's this particular promise. Let's say I promise you that I will give you a cupcake if you give me $3.80. That promise is premised upon multiple layers of promises. Multiple layers. Okay, so let's go through basically first key assumptions. If you want to make a cupcake shop, you have to assume that people have cash, that people actually want your stupid cupcake. You have to assume that basically you have land to actually somehow rent or buy a space where you can run your cupcake shop. And you have to assume over here that actually there are even goods like cake mixers and things that come in. So when you do this over here, these are the first row of assumptions. But in these assumptions you're looking at here, this assumption, right, is therefore that the goods will be there if imports do come in, right? Essentially itself, we will have cash if we have jobs, right? People will have needs, and I'm not joking. You only have needs if you have people, right? But if you look at people, you only have people if you have births, you only have people if you have ports, airports and seaports, and that's how they come in, right? They either come in itself, right, because you give birth to them, or they come in itself essentially because they travel in, right? That's where they come, right? Yeah. So when people come in, right, that particular way, you find that these particular things largely, and even these are assumptions, you know. They're assumptions. Right? If you take a look at these ideas here, and you ask yourself, why do goods come? And why are there these people, right? Goods comes because of Singapore's complete excellence. That's why they come. Do they have to come to our ports? No. They don't have to come. Here. This path doesn't have to come. They only come because we are completely competitive, because we consistently try to stay number one. They only come because, right, we invest a lot in training. They only come because we keep investing in technology, and that's why itself we can move at the speed we do. If these three things are gone, this is gone. If this is gone, this doesn't come. These things are empty. This thing doesn't come in. And then you start understanding what you mean by you have no natural resources. You don't produce your own food. You don't have your own water. So this cupcake shop, whatever dreams itself, right, that this particular lawyer has in making a cupcake shop, is premised upon multiple layers itself of stuff that's there. Why do people really come here? Why is it that this actually works and leads to people? Right? It comes over here essentially because people come because of reputation. Right? And reputation is premised on safe, secure, predictable. And I'm not kidding about this. The reason why they come is because Singapore is so damn predictable. Because if I put my money in, right, I know it doesn't end up in the Prime Minister's pocket. If I go in, I know there won't be an umbrella revolution. If I put my money in, I know that basically there wouldn't be an earthquake or a coup or some crap like that could happen to itself, that suddenly your banks get frozen, my money gets stuck and I can't begin to move out. In fact, because you're so completely predictable and stable that particular way, then of course I'll bring my money in, right? And you're an asset to me that way. So when you start looking at this over here, right, and you start seeing these ideas, essentially you then understand what these three words are about. When Taman keeps running out these particular words, innovation, productivity, he's referring to this whole part over here. Stay excellent. Stay excellent. Find a new way of doing things, right? Essentially itself, right? Create more, produce for less effort, right? But a lot of this stuff over here only works, and I say this not in election period or things like that. Whatever the leadership is, right? That leadership, I genuinely do not think, right, that Singapore will survive, or we are voting on who should rule Hougang. And you make it basically domestic politics, right? You really miss the point. So you look at these ideas, right? And let's just look at three same words over here: safe, secure, predictable, right? Are there particular threats that are coming to Singapore right now that we're starting to worry, right? These are the current threats. Singapore's not so predictable anymore. We really have a very entitled population. Really very entitled. And they're starting, I'm not so confident over how votes are going to work, right? So that scares me quite a bit. I have never seen the CPIB, right, do public engagement in the way that right now it's trying to do. Corruption cases are starting to increase, right? If you look at Transparency Index, Singapore has always been either first or second in incorruptibility, right? This year we are number 7. We're number 7, right? So it doesn't mean itself we've become Indonesia, right? But we are 7th, right? Where we used to be either 1 or 2. So we're just not as clean as we were before. If you start looking at these particular words, right, and let's look at all the stuff in blue, right, unfortunately, this is what you're up against. Imports may not come because of climate change, because of the newly rich that are now buying your durians. When tuna becomes short, right, people itself are going to start picking up this particular stuff. Your total fertility rate now is 0.8. Right? Singapore claims it's 1.1, CIA says it's 0.8. If you look at aging, did I spell it correct? Yes, I do. Competing economies, land shortage, right? And all these particular words in red over here. And what's interesting about this particular diagram, right, is that all the words in red are threats, right? But there's key things on the ground. People think, but never mind. I have cash, I can go to Australia. A lot of reasons why, right, people migrate is because when they look at basically all these issues you're looking at over here, right, these actually can't, or the belief is that they can't be solved by a single individual, right? Then there's all this mess over here, and this base is no longer, right, what it was, and we have right now not become as excellent. We are resistant to learning. We want to play safe. We're not actually entrepreneurial. We're not going out to try things over there. Then yes, right? Next 50 years, unfortunately, when I listen to almost everybody, they are really not optimistic when it comes to the next 50 years. They're not. It seems as if, right, the odds are greatly stacked against us. We will have basically, right, a ratio of 3:1 in terms of elderly to old people by the year 2025. Right now, our ratio is 1:7. Right, 7 young people for 1 old person. Right. Soon will be 3:1. We don't know how this will impact the economy. Right? Tax could go up. If tax goes up, Singapore's no longer a tax haven. No longer a tax haven, investors start moving out, and the whole cycle starts. Honestly, as far as the issues that are challenging Singapore today, again, I say this seriously, I do think the odds are stacked against us. Okay? The good news is number 3. That the odds were stacked against us in 1965 anyway. Exactly. We don't have a culture of innovation, but we have a very, very strong precedent. Right? I don't think we come to a place over here where immediately snap our hands over here, we are an innovative society. Right? What we do have over here is basically a generation before us, right, that made these kind of things happen. And when you look at the audacity at how they begin to live and declare and said, fuck it, I'm going to do it, I think that's a cultural legacy. and it's worth keeping. So do we know what will happen in the next 50 years? I don't think so. The good news, however, is number one, we have a lot of reserves, right? If you look at most innovation curves over here, when a country is, any organization is learning, it will go into a J curve, right? And we will pay that particular price, right? But if we pay that particular price and we're transitioning out over here, we have enough to actually get us through, right? We are small, we are nimble, right? And because we are small, we are a great prototype itself for other cities to learn from, right? So if we can pull ourselves out, right, and do this over here, then yes, Singapore can survive. They really can. I don't mean to be, wrong about this, but unfortunately, it does depend upon your generation. It really does. Yeah. So the first thing I need you to do is go and have babies. Go home, find a partner. But really look at these things, right? And don't play around. If you think about following your passion is about, I don't know, that I'm in this work, it's very painful, so much suffering. I want to go and follow my passion. You're simply moving from one suffering to another. Yeah. The question is whether you are committed to the story of what it can be or what it should be. That's what makes suffering pleasurable. Are you committed to that story of what it can be and what it should be? Right? And if you are, then I think we honestly have a chance. Honestly. So let me close with the last slide. So I changed the tense, but essentially this is the cultural legacy you have. If Singaporeans made it happen, right, in the past, it's largely because they did master their own passions. They did develop compassion. They truly began to care for other agendas out of their own, right? And yes, they found hell of a damn good opportunities everywhere. Okay, thank you.